Good evening. Welcome back for part 2 of Front Page Close-Up's interview with Raza. Raheel, welcome back to the program.
Thank you.
We ended part 1 on the issue of women in Islam. I want to discuss that in this segment, but before we do, I don't want to skip. You're such a fighter, and in the first part we discussed your battle with the Ground Zero Mosque developers. But in Geneva, you also took on the Islamist apologist Tariq Ramadan. Can you tell us what happened there?
Well, I was at the United Nations Human Rights Commission, and I had gone there so we could put in a petition making honor killings an international criminal offense. And while I was there was a panel discussion hosted by Amnesty International, and in which Tariq Ramadan was on the panel. And it so happened that when he was speaking, he kept on speaking of Islam and the West, and he referred many times to this concept of Islamophobia, which I don't agree at all, which is the idea of victim ideology, you know, that Muslims are being oppressed and Muslims are being suppressed. And so, you know,
wait a minute, you actually don't, as a Muslim, you actually don't like that term being used,
no.
Islamophobia.
Oh, Islamophobia is an absolutely useless term. You know, Islamophobia means fear of Islam, or, you know, they use it as a victim ideology to stop any criticism of Islam or Muslims.
And you support criticism of it.
Well,
you support the criticism that you think should, or
absolutely,
that people have the
because
freedom
you see,
to
in
do.
a healthy democracy, criticism is very important. Criticism keeps us humble, criticism keeps me humble, and criticism helps us become better people. Also, as a committed Muslim, if you criticize Islam or Muslims, it doesn't really make any difference to me. It doesn't touch the faith. It doesn't.
Okay, just a sec. So would you be in support of the cartoons that were done?
I always supported freedom of press, and I always supported the publication of the cartoons. Now, I don't necessarily have to agree and say that it was in good taste, because I do think that people who sort of go so far are doing something in bad taste. I personally don't feel that, you know, I feel that one should be a little sensitive when criticizing other people's faiths, because it's something I wouldn't do.
But having done it,
the society has the freedom to do it.
And so this gets us back to Tariq Ramadan, because I remember your main point is that there is freedom in the West, and that people have the right to speak in the West, which is something that you admire about the West, having come from Pakistan, and that freedom of expression, let's say, does not really do that well in many Muslim countries.
It doesn't do well at all.
So you raised some of this with Tariq Ramadan, and what happened?
I did, and I criticized him right there in front of the panel, and I said, you know, what kind of message are you giving when you constantly keep on separating Islam as the West as two separate entities, which is wrong, because my children have grown up as Western Muslims. So why should I try and instill in them that there is a huge difference or that there is an ideological difference? They are Canadian Muslims, and it should never be a problem.
And he agreed with you?
No, he just sat there and looked at me. Why?
Was he shocked, or was
I think he was a little shocked.
Now, somebody had walked out during your speech.
Oh yes.
What happened there? Who walked out?
That was the Pakistani ambassador. It's a man.
He walked out.
He had actually started this diatribe about this victim ideology and, you know, lack of human rights for Muslims. And I thought that, yes. Well, he didn't say in the West, but all over, especially in the West.
Okay.
And I thought that that was utter hypocrisy, because if you look at the situation in Pakistan where minorities are oppressed, there is a blasphemy law, and anyone can be picked up or killed, and there is no accountability. And here is the Pakistani ambassador speaking about human rights violations against Muslims. I thought that this was the height of hypocrisy, and I actually couldn't hold back, so I told him off. And when he heard me say that I was a Pakistani Canadian, he got up and started leaving the room.
Was it that he didn't like what he was hearing, or was it also he didn't like what he was hearing from a woman? Or
absolutely,
it was both? He was probably in shock, because if this happened maybe in Pakistan, you might have been killed.
I may have been stopped. Yes, I definitely would have been stopped. I know that he was in shock, but he is a senior diplomat. And diplomacy means that if you have made a comment, you at least wait for someone to respond to it. He got up and started leaving as soon as he heard that I was a Pakistani Canadian. And I actually spoke to his back and said that it's very rude of you to leave when I'm actually responding to what you had said.
Did he apologize?
No, of course not. He just walked out. And then I spoke to Tariq Ramadan about this idea of, separate, constantly putting this divide between Islam in the West and Muslims in the West. And he said, well, that's not what I meant to say. But that's definitely what came across.
Well, he's always involved in obfuscation, right? Yes, he hides who he is.
Exactly. Right? So that's now the issue is, and it comes back to the Ground Zero Mosque Imam as well. If you say one thing in one language and something else in English, then you are obviously not an honest person.
Right.
I should be able to say the same thing in my language that I say in English. So, I have an issue with this kind of hypocrisy. Whatever it is, one should be upfront about it.
Raheel, we've brought up the misogyny and the issues of women. Maybe this is the best way just to crystallize this issue. Let's begin with you personally. Why aren't you veiled?
Because there's nowhere in the Quran that says that I have to cover my head. This is, again, let me explain to you, Jamie, there is no priesthood. There's no formal priesthood in Islam. And it's a fantastic reason why we have to read, understand with logic, and implement the message in our lives. So I have read the Quran from cover to cover. The word hijab is mentioned 7 times, and nowhere does it mean a head covering. The word hair is not used.
But there's let's say the fundamentalist clerics, etc., when they say that it's the obligation of women to veil, it's rooted that Muhammad started wanting his wives to veil. Am I correct?
It's an entirely different background there. Okay. This is a specific situation where the wives of the Prophet were told to draw their cloaks around their chests.
And that could be interpreted in different ways.
Absolutely. No, it is a simple interpretation that they were a special family of the Prophet. They were told to wrap their cloaks around their
So it
chest.
didn't mean that for the rest of women?
No, it didn't. And so that's how I understand it. And that is entirely my independent thought process. And I am at the liberty to, to read and implement the Quran in my life. And I do.
Now, so this even gets a bit crazier, because even if one wanted to argue on that level, what's going on with the burqas and the niqabs and even the face veilings in Canada and in the West? Where does that come from, and is that Islamic? And if it's not Islamic, why is it happening in Afghanistan and Saudi Arabia, etc.? And even more frighteningly, in the West.
Yes. These are tribal customs. If you go back 1400 years ago, women, camels, horses, everyone used to wear a veil because of the flying sand and so on. But we are not living in Saudi Arabia or Arabia in 1400 years ago. It is not permitted in Islam for a woman to cover her face. When we go for the pilgrimage, which is the Hajj, one of the 5 pillars of Islam, women are not allowed to cover their face. And if they do, the actual local security forces ask them to uncover their face. When we pray, we don't cover our face.
Why do the muftis and the clerics and the imams want women to cover up then?
Because essentially many of the extremists and very, very orthodox leaders of the Muslim world would like to bury women alive again, metaphorically, as they used to do before the advent of Islam, when newborn girls would be buried alive. They were considered to be without a soul.
And they're carrying on that tradition.
That was a pre-Islamic pagan tradition.
But Raheel, there's also misogyny in Islam itself as well.
Well,
right?
Absolutely, there is. This is what. So over the years, there's patriarchy, there's misogyny, there's power, there's politics. It's about control. And absolutely, they want to oppress women by forcing all these different issues on them, which have nothing to do with the faith.
Raheel, we have to go for a break now, but where I was very disappointed with Obama and the way that the left frames the debate in the West, Obama, said, when he speaks about the veil, that Muslim women should have the right to veil. I think that a person has dignity and integrity on this issue and knows how women suffer under Sharia. I think that we should pronounce yes, Muslim women have the right to veil, but Muslim women should also have the right not to veil and not to fear violence and reprisal, especially on Western territory.
Absolutely.
Why doesn't our media speak of it in that way?
Because your leaders are not willing to support this. It's all about votes. It's about political correctness.
And political correctness is...
Absolutely. Political correctness is about not speaking the truth sometimes. The thing is that, and this is why my struggle is so much more difficult, because, you know, I'm slammed from each side, and then we have leaders, political leaders, who are not willing to support these causes. You have to understand, and they have to understand, that a face veil is both a security and a safety issue. We are living in a post-9/11 world, especially in North America. When you travel, you need to show your identity. I mean, you know how long the lines are, and it's getting worse by the day. So why should a certain group of people be given privilege and say, no, they're allowed to cover their face when it's only a tribal custom, when it's not religion? But in Canada, we have been able to put a petition to the government saying that face covering should be banned. And you'll be happy to know that it's actually been banned in some Muslim countries as well. And
I think it's important to stress that the face veil was stopped in Canada not because of anybody else, but the strength of the Muslim community.
Absolutely.
That stopped it. We're going to be back for part 3 with RaheelRaza tomorrow evening. Join us. We're going to be talking about Barack Obama, the events in Pakistan, and what future we see for the possibility of reforming Islam.